We have very little time to do what we are setting out to do.
I think this is going to be a remarkable few days, and I'm extremely excited to see what people come up with.
Climate change, inflation, autocracy, inequality, and xenophobia. Today's crisis management is an agenda without a clear agent.
Businesses are also duty bearers. They must be accountable for their climate impacts and participate responsibly in climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts with full respect for human rights. So the question then becomes for business. The state has the duty. The state is supposed to be regulated. The state is not doing its job. What do you do? The expectation is that businesses have their own independent responsibility to respect human rights, and it exists even when states are failing. In fact, it becomes more important when states are failing.
That's why the goal for the 2023 Transformative Business Law Summer Academy is to assess these problems and develop a series of recommendations around the roles both financial and non-financial organizations can play to solve them. This year's Academy brings together lawyers, business experts, climate change and human rights scholars, anthropologists, and political scientists.
And so we're all working together, and we are exploring different aspects and dimensions of sustainable finance, but also of sustainable governance more generally. The Summer Academy is a brand new and rather ambitious, as you might have gathered so far, undertaking.
Bringing together all these different perspectives will allow the Academy members to break down these key challenges. As the Academy is very much focused on deliverables, the goal is to come up with concrete, relevant, and accessible policy recommendations for key stakeholders.
Our attempt to make this memorable, we might try to identify the traces of some of the debates that we're engaged in now, and to see why these debates still continue as they do.
During 5 days of intensive collaboration, the Academy members tackle 5 different, highly relevant problems. At the end of the Academy, all their findings were combined in the TBLSA 2023 Impact Paper, which will become a publicly available resource for lawyers, managers, and researchers.
Welcome to the Academy. Now let's get started. There is a barrage that is of terms that just will fly at you the moment you Google or try to find something. That is not very different from what you experience already in your daily life.
So it's a huge wave that comes left and right to put pressure on those goals that we need to achieve as a society to move the needle in the right direction.
As more and more voices start calling for companies to go beyond their traditional goal of maximizing profits, ideologies crash. Agreeing on the fact that companies should transcend their economic goals is one thing, but filling the new role is another. Proposals for policy reform are met with hostile reactions, rendering the debate even more volatile. The Academy proposes a radical shift from a purely profit-driven economy towards a purpose-driven economy. ESGs must go from a corporate catchphrase to a core part of business models. To accomplish this, business and law schools should teach current and former students about the purpose-driven economy. Corporations should be required to state their social purpose within their articles of incorporation. An ESG metric system for the 7 most polluting industries should be developed, and corporations should be required to report on them.
I realized today that yes, you are able to grow a company, to grow a profitable company, and to still remain with your values of being sustainable, because I have not once compromised on that.
This is bad for business. So why do we keep investing in these sectors?
There's finance and sustainable finance. Eventually, it should be all together. If there's no more, let's say, brown loans or brown assets or brown operations, if we can say, versus green, when everybody will be to the standard that everybody needs to be to save the planet, to have a better society and take care of each other.
But who should be pushing for more sustainable finance? The state or the market? Maybe the differences between countries are too big to provide one conclusive answer.
The tendency is to say we are all responsible and we all have to change. But of course, we are not all responsible. There isn't a we. There is a history, and there are certain people who have had huge impacts, and then there are others who have had minuscule impacts.
Not everyone is on board with the sustainable finance movement either. Some have labeled ESG investment strategies as woke and ideologically inspired. To begin incorporating ESG investments on a bigger scale, commonly applied standards quantifying the environmental and social risks are a good start. But what else do we need to counter anti-ESG movements? Is Canada optimally leveraging Export Development Canada to deploy made nationally climate solutions? How should Canada work with multilateral development banks to expand climate finance? And what reforms should we advocate to make these bodies more effective? Can Canada promise more flexible financial instruments that bring together multiple streams of capital to meet the scale of this challenge? Can Canada help facilitate debt restructuring on more favorable terms for countries saddled with high energy costs and food prices?
As you look at the transnational law and other sources that guide what businesses and financial institutions and others should be doing in the climate space, take a look. Are they focusing on mitigation only? Are they starting to also address adaptation? Is it just adaptation by and for the business, or are they actually looking at adaptation of others? Is anybody talking about loss and damage and responsibility for harm? How can that be integrated into the system?
Climate change is everywhere. So if the law has a role to play in protecting our planet, do we have to question everything? Scientists have long known that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But doing so requires a rethinking of the very foundations of our legal, political, and economic structures. Criticism towards the degrowth movement, arguing that ecological preservation and economic growth cannot coexist, is but one facet of the existential discussion surrounding climate change. On top of that, our legal framework is being challenged by questions regarding loss and damage, green finance, and adaptation. Climate change changes everything. What does a law look like that is able to protect the global ecosystem? This legal debate has quickly become a jumbled mess of voices, reports, warnings, legislation, and contestation. But what we need are concrete instruments of institutional and cognitive transformation. This academy explores the connections between national, international, and transnational initiatives. The goal is to capture the reality of climate change politics and governance. A first step is considering climate action from a holistic perspective. Looking at the climate crisis as a broader planetary crisis exposes an underlying challenge in shifting the paradigm towards effective and meaningful sustainability. Thorough, effective governance remains key for implementing climate crisis recommendations. This extends beyond governments and corporations to integrate historically marginalized communities.
Despite the abolition of slavery, forced labor, economic exploitation, and even child labor continue to be hidden in plain sight. Corporations in the global north have proven to be excellent at pushing these practices down the value chain. Some cite market failure as the reason why this is possible and advocate for self-regulation through voluntary initiatives. Others see modern slavery as a structural component of today's economic system and call for a reevaluation of the architecture of today's globally integrated economy. Managers who have an organizational perspective and anthropologists with a more on-the-ground perspective depict the problem of slavery very differently. So, if we can't agree on what the problem is exactly, how can we address it? The difficulty is to reconcile the benefits global value chains provide with the harms they create. Global value chains are characterized by the distribution of production in many different countries and across different companies who coordinate production through contractual relationships. The governance of global value chains must balance the pursuit of economic value with the human rights violations, modern slavery conditions, and environmental damages that GVCs create. A variety of public and private, international and national actors are involved in governing these supply chains. These actors create hard law and non-binding regulations to mandate or encourage disclosure about GVC, human rights due diligence in GVCs, and the creation of meaningful certifications that recognize and identify responsibly managed global value chains.
And there are also huge disproportionate impacts in terms of who bears the burden of the Anthropocene. It's hugely important that we're always cautious when we hear somebody speaking in language that suggests what I would call a universal we. There isn't a universal we. Beware of cautious of thinking about power. Who has power? Are those with power acting responsibly?
When Elon Musk took over Twitter, then we debated what would happen if Twitter were suddenly ceased to exist. What would you miss? And everybody in the classroom said, I would miss a lot of my news. And then we actually tried to identify who we would miss. And hardly anyone knew the names of somebody that they would miss. They just know somehow there's information that comes every day.
New innovations in the field of artificial intelligence have resulted in a fast-growing asymmetry between public and private control over data. This asymmetry risks to put our traditional conceptions of individual rights and democratic values in jeopardy. Tech companies rule over the way we receive, share, and process information. This has led to an increasingly polarized and radical public discourse, threatening the foundations of any democracy, a well-informed population sharing a sense of reality. How do we keep those foundations intact when privately owned platforms control the majority of the content we consume? Who should be in charge of moderating this content, and what limitations should be put in place? In the age of digitalization and artificial intelligence, social media platforms are where political opinions are formed. The spread of false information contributes to political polarization and radicalization. Big tech has the responsibility to protect social stability, economic growth, and the democratic values that serve stakeholders and the public at large. Social media platforms must address the spread of mis- and disinformation for democracies to flourish, and democratic flourishing is necessary for corporations to achieve their CSR goals.
In 96 hours, fellows and faculty members at McGill Sustainable Growth Initiative's Transformative Business Law Summer Academy analyzed both long-standing and emerging issues in their respective research areas. The Academy has also had the honor of welcoming distinguished business leaders as guest speakers, inspiring fellows through collaborative work and personal interviews.
I'm very humbled to have been part of it, to have learned together, to have learned from colleagues, to have learned from our group.
In this way, the inaugural year of the Academy has been an exhilarating experience for its participants coming from all parts of the globe. That's why the Academy is proud to officially present the TBLSA 2023 Impact Paper, an in-depth study of pressing topics in the areas of corporate governance, sustainable finance, supply chain management, environmental social governance, human rights, and democratic governance.